SBF, the CEO of FTX, just got arrested, indicted, and he's facing a whole slew of charges and complaints. We've got 3 of them to go through. 1, criminal charges from the SDNY, Security Exchange Commission also sending charges, and the Commodities Future Trading Commission, all very upset, filing complaints against the infamous SBF. A lot of money, billions of dollars evaporated very conveniently, and this guy's been roaming around, spending a lot of time in the Bahamas, just living it up, evidently. We're going to check in with this individual, John J. Ray III. He was testifying in front of Congress today, saying that, yeah, SBF was a little bit, inadequate in terms of his competency to run an organization like this. And we'll see what he has to say about this. But first, let's see how this all began, because this kind of came as a surprise. I mean, here we are sitting, waiting for the federal government to jump into action, spring into some sort of criminal charges. And that has not been happening for a long period of time. People scratching their heads. There's millions of investors, millions of everyday individuals, maybe you yourself, have gotten hosed by this catastrophic collapse, and people are following the money around, asking where it all went. So surprise, surprise, on December 12th, just one day before there was these financial hearings that took place in Congress, we got an interesting note from the U.S. attorney out of the Southern District of New York. The guy's name is Damian Williams, and he said, earlier this evening, the Bahamian authorities arrested Sam Bankman-Fried at the request of the U.S. government based on a sealed indictment by the SDNY. We expect to move to unseal the indictment in the morning, and we'll have more to say at that time. Now, of course, they did, and we're going to go through that indictment in full. But first, let's take a look at what the Bahamas had to say about this, because they were also there, obviously, and they needed to cooperate with the federal government. Are they going to be working with them or not? This was also drafted December 12th. The statement from the Attorney General of the Bahamas, Senator Ryan Pinder, KC, on the arrest of SBF, writes as follows. On December 12th, the Office of the Attorney General of the Bahamas is announcing the arrest by the Royal Bahamas Police Force of SBF, former CEO of FTX. SBF's arrest followed the receipt of a formal notification from the United States government that it has filed criminal charges and it's likely to request its extradition. As a result of this notification received and the materials provided therewith, it was deemed appropriate for the Attorney General to seek SBF's arrest and hold him in custody pursuant to our nation's Extradition Act. At such a time a formal request for extradition is made, the Bahamas intends to process it promptly pursuant to the Bahamian law and to its treaty obligations with the U.S. Prime Minister Davis in the Bahamas responded to the arrest. He said, the Bahamas and the United States have a shared interest in holding accountable all individuals associated with FTX who may have betrayed the public trust and broken the law. While the United States is pursuing criminal charges against him individually, the Bahamas will continue its own regulatory investigations into the collapse, and we hope with the continued cooperation of its law enforcement in the United States and elsewhere, right? So they're all working together to go and try to stop this individual from leaving or fleeing. They're going to be arresting him, extraditing him. Don't know, if he's landed in the United States or where he's sort of being processed or what the current status of his physical location is. But both sides of the coin, everybody's jumping in on this. All right. Bahamas say, cool. Thank you, SDNY. We love it. Also, SDNY says the indictment will be unsealed, and we are going to go through that here in a minute. But first, let's take a look at this very interesting photo. You remember previously on this channel, we asked ourselves this question. What was Miss Ellison doing in New York? This post came out from Alistair Milne when we were following the sort of the lack of prosecution. We were asking ourselves, why is it taking so long? And we know grand juries and different indictments can take some time. But people were asking themselves, why is SBF's partner in crime, Carolyn Ellingson, the one who is pictured here from, the very famous photographs with her and SBF, what is she doing just walking around New York as a free woman? People were saying, is that even her? Is that really her? Somebody said, yeah, it was, right? They actually confirmed this with the barista on the other side of the coffee shop. And he said, yeah, it's definitely her. She's here. So we were all wondering what that was about. Of course, she may have been there meeting with the prosecutors. She may have been working on providing interviews, providing evidence, maybe in exchange for her innocence, right? Maybe she'll work with the government in exchange for leniency, for a better plea deal. And so we've got a lot to talk about before we get to the actual court documents, because the CEO, who has now been in charge of FTX, the person who has replaced SBF, his name is John J. Ray III, and he was testifying in front of Congress today. They were supposed to have SBF there. Remember, they had him playing this kissy face game with Maxine Waters on Twitter. She said, "We'd love to have you here." And he said, "I'd love to be there. Gosh, it'd be great." And all of that was supposed to take place today, the 13th of December. But none of that did happen. But somebody did show up in front of this committee to be asked some questions, and he provided us with some very interesting answers. John J. Ray III says that the FTX leaders, people like SBF and Caroline Ellison, were completely incompetent. They had no experience. They should not have been managing any of this at all.
The FTX group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced, non-sophisticated individuals.
Non-sophisticated.
Who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets.
Or $40 billion.
Some of the unacceptable management practices have identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets.
So it was just a
storing of certain
free-for-all.
private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption.
I think they were just sending these private keys like in unencrypted notepad files, and they were dropping them like in Slack channels. Hey, do you have access to the DNC account? Yeah, I do. Do you need it? Yeah. Can you just Slack me over the private key? I need to move a couple million over to whoever's running. Okay, that's what's going on, and they've got 40 billion or whatever it is under management. Okay.
The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets, and the absence of audited or reliable financial statements, the lack of personnel in financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group.
Not good. Total incompetence, and they are having to piece this all together. He said 500 different investments, no documentation at all. He carries on with this line of questioning. He's asked about the documentation. Mr. Lucas asks Mr. Ray, what was the extent of this manipulation, oversight? Where were the problems with FTX?
Clearly, your profession is cleaning up messes that other people have made. That's a fair way to describe it. Not messes that you made, but they made. How does this compare, in your experience, magnitude-wise?
Well, it's
the worst or the worst by magnitudes?
It's one of the worst from a documentation standpoint. Even in the most failed companies, you have a fair roadmap of what happened. We're dealing with literally a sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets.
And they were even using deleting messages, right? They had different Slack channels, and they were using different technologies where they would delete the messages. And evidently, that was part of the standard operating procedure. I think there's even evidence that Sam was saying, this is how I want things to be run, right? It's actually a security benefit because nobody can see what we're actually using, and stuff evaporates in thin air. But the problem is, right, all of this nefariousness, everything that was the theft of money was untraceable. So everybody, this guy's having to piece it together after the fact.
And particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world, it's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation. And so he is going through this. Ray the Third is diving through what's left, right? Many of these documents, as he mentioned, have already been deleted, and there's nothing really to unpack. But people have questions about the money. Where did it go? We know that Sam was living in the Bahamas, something like $130 million mansion property, insane. But what about everybody else? We know that there's been tens at least of millions that is quantified that Sam, FTX, Alameda, whomever, transferred over to the Democrats. Estimates from people like Elon Musk have said this could be as much as $1 billion, right? When you start to follow the tentacles wherever they may lead, because it wasn't just FTX and Alameda. It was also all of their subsidiaries that were funneling money all over the place, which is why Maxine Waters on the House Finance Committee was blowing kissy faces over to SBF when he was parading around Congress. But what about the money that has not been recovered? What about the family? Is there evidence that there were other actors involved? The answer is yes. Mr. Ray III answers a question in Congress saying, yeah, SBF's family, yeah, they got a nice chunk of that money.
Is there any evidence of his parents' involvement in the operations?
We're investigating that, as well as any other, players in the
Email, Slack, Signal.
It's billions of records. It's a very vibrant environment.
So I hear that you haven't discovered that. I mean, it would seem interesting that that they didn't either give legal advice or business advice or parental advice.
SBF's parents evidently are, very high up lawyers, people at Stanford, people who are in the regulatory finance area, who've talked about cryptocurrencies, who are sort of in this industry. And this is one of the reasons why people like Kevin O'Leary, who is one of the individuals on Shark Tank, why he said that he trusted SBF and FTX. I believe we played the clip here where he said, well, actually, I trust this organization because Sam's parents are compliance lawyers. So nothing could possibly go wrong with any of these cases.
Maybe.
Well, certainly, clearly, and I think in our first day papers, we indicated that that Mr. Bankman had given legal advice.
Okay, had he been an employee of FTX, as has been reported?
I don't know if he actually had an employee status, but he certainly received payments from, the family did receive payments.
Okay, that sounds like employment to me. You got a payment for...
Family got payments.
Well, I raise that because on December 8 of 2020...
Look at that little smile he's got, too. How much money went over there? And he kind of has a little De Niro look, doesn't he? He kind of looks like Mr. Robert De Niro. He sort of talks, you know what I mean? Kind of one of those. Yeah.
December 8 of 2021, I met with Sam Bankman-Fried in my office, which I will note was just immediately before he came down to the hearing. He was at least 15 minutes late, and his father accompanied him in that meeting. I asked and focused on what types of regulation he was under, his engagement with regulators, and how that affected FTX. But it seems to me that there's a lot more to uncover here. Certainly, Mr. Bankman-Fried has...
Oh, what's going on?
Mr. Bankman-Fried has...
Come on, what's going on with this video? It's not loading.
Around the world, and yes, certainly here in D.C., he was, they loved, everybody loved the exciting idea of a politically progressive, smart entrepreneur who was going to reimagine capitalism and change the world, feeling better about themselves, all while making them gobs of money. And I'm glad to see it's finally unraveled. So my time is up, and I yield back.
So they definitely got payments. The old family got payments. And the question is, are they going to get any money back? Is it going to come back in any way, shape, or form? Because part of this is about clawing it back, right? We know some people have already given some money back. They're donating it, or basically saying, here, return it back to the company and to the trustee, the people who are managing all of these assets while they work through it. But are the everyday retail investors, right, are people who are not professional class investors, the people who don't have the ability to, hire a ton of lawyers and to claw this stuff back, is this going to come back to them in any way, shape, or form? That's the big question that goes over to John J. Ray III. Is any of this money from FTX coming back? And if so, How quickly can you get it?
Is there a timetable that you think you can get to that? And that can be a yes or no. I think I'm getting close to my time.
There's no particular time frame, but it's as quickly as possible in my experience with Enron.
And is that months? Is that weeks? Quickly as possible.
How
It
fast?
certainly isn't weeks. It's definitely months. And the causes of action, could take longer.
Years.
But we will marshal assets on a weekly basis and on a monthly basis, and we'll do that as quickly as possible.
All right, so they're working hard to get that money back, and John J. Ray III is leading that. Now, coming up, we've got Sam Bankman-Fried. He's got 3 different complaints. You see, we're going to go through the actual indictment from the Southern District of New York. We're going to check in with what the Security Exchange Commission is upset about, as well as the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. But before we jump into any of that, let's say thanks to our friends over at 4 Patriots. And today, I want to share with you the new version of our friends sponsorship from 4patriots.com. My friends, a food shortage could be coming. Even in the United States, experts have written about this as recently as July. Drought, inflation, even new policies are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years super survival food, hand-packed right in family-owned facilities in the United States, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, and they stack easily. They have different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including this 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Use code Robert. Start building your own stockpile today. That's right, my friends. You definitely don't want to starve to death. And so thank you to our friends over at 4patriots.com. All right. So now let's get into the serious heavy lifting that we need to do after we had a nice little water break. That's nice, little water break. And we can jump right into this with the indictment, starting once the screen is full. SBF Sam Bankman-Fried indicted out of the Southern District of New York, charges brought by the United States of America. This is the 14-page sealed indictment with the various counts. We see starting with count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on customers. One of the more obvious ones, people saying, yeah, kind of a no-brainer, what took so long? But the grand jury came out and they write as follows. They say, from at least in or about 2019, all the way up till November of this year, out of the Southern District of New York, the individual known as SBF did knowingly and willfully combine, conspire, confederate, and agree to commit wire fraud. Pretty obvious. It was an object of the conspiracy that Sam, the defendant, and others, known and unknown, knowingly having devised and intending to devise a scheme and artifice to defraud and for obtaining money and property, would and did transmit and cause to be transmitted into interstate commerce customer deposits, misappropriating those funds and using those deposits to pay the expenses of Alameda Research. In other words, they took the money out of the bank, your money out of the bank, and they used it for their own purposes. Now, the grand jury says something similar, right? A lot of this is very legalese, and so we'll sort of skip through it, but the wire fraud is count 2, wire fraud on customers. So you can see the first one is the conspiracy to commit the wire fraud. You can conspire about doing something without actually doing it, but they actually did it. So they actually conspired, and then they did the wire fraud. Same people, SBF and others, conspired. They devised a scheme and artifice to obtain money by fraudulent pretenses. They said your money would be secured. They sent that money by means of wire transmitted over interstate commerce. and they defrauded customers. Similar reason to pay the expenses and the debts. Count 3. We also see that they're being charged, or he's being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud on the lenders, right? So a different party, not just the customers and their deposits, but also the lenders, which is a different financial mechanism. Same thing. This one goes back to June, though, so it's actually narrowing the time frame a bit. All the way to November, did defraud all of these lenders. Fraudulent pretenses, transmitted these things by means of wire, radio, and others. Count 4, the same thing, the actual wire fraud. So it goes from the conspiracy to the actual charges of wire fraud. Same thing here, right? Not a whole lot difference. This one is, again, to defraud lenders to Alameda by providing false and misleading information to those lenders, benefiting Bankman's crypto hedge fund. Now, there's also commodities fraud. From at least 2019 all the way up until recent era, SBF committed commodities fraud. It was the object of the conspiracy that SBF would and did directly use and employ a contract of sale of a commodity in order to manipulate the funds. Those deposits were misappropriated and used to pay Bankman-Fried's proprietary crypto hedge fund to make investments, right? A misappropriation of the money. Count 6, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Same type of allegations here. And so this is going through the legal elements of each count. And so we can see count 7, conspiracy to commit money laundering. Same type of structure in the indictment. They took proceeds from unlawful activity. They disguised it, the location, the source, the ownership, the control of those proceeds, and they engaged in unlawful activity committing wire fraud. They say that this was resulting in a property that was criminally deprived. People were deprived of their property for values greater than $10,000. Definitely a lot more than that. And also a conspiracy to defraud the United States and violate campaign finance laws. Oh, maybe that's all that DNC money. They say from at least in or about 2020 up until recent era, they say that SBF did knowingly combine and do other things. He engaged in violations of the federal law by making and receiving contributions without reporting them. It was also part of this conspiracy that he would use dishonest means to obstruct and defeat the lawful functions of the Federal Election Commission. You can't do that. You can't give somebody a benefit without reporting it to the FEC. Looking at you, Twitter. It was a further part of the conspiracy that he did knowingly try to make contributions to candidates in the amount over $25,000, a lot more than that. And in furtherance of this conspiracy and elsewhere, all of this was not reported in violation of the law. So they're asking for forfeiture, meaning they want to take some of this property. They say, Judge, can we please have everything? He shall forfeit to the United States anything that was derived, proceeds that are traceable from the commission of the offenses. They say if any of the above described forfeitable property cannot be found or it's substantially diminished, they're asking the judge to do some stuff about that. Right? This is signed off on by Damian Williams, the United States Attorney from the Southern District of New York. The sealed indictment, it was filed on December 9th, 2022. The arrest warrant was issued, and the individual named Valerie is the person who signed off on this. Foreperson of the jury. I think it's just a note from a court clerk or something that was added onto the official filing. Okay, so this is the criminal indictment, right? And, it's just the charges. So there's not a whole lot of interesting material there, to be honest, other than just the nature of the charges. And the charges are about what you'd expect. You have the conspiracy, and then you have the actual offense. And they're taking the charge and applying it to all of the different categories of victims, the people who are all defrauded. And the law these are different financial mechanisms, conveyances. And so they are regulated in different sections of the U.S. Code. And Sam violated all of them, right, by actually transmitting this stuff. So some interesting stuff there, not as much sort of meat and potatoes as we like, but let's turn our attention over to another complaint. This one is 28 pages. The SEC versus Sam Bankman-Fried. A jury trial is demanded in this one. And here we get a little bit more of a summary with some narrative from the complainant. They write, from at least May through November of 2022, SBF engaged in a scheme to defraud equity investors of FTX, the crypto asset trading platform where he was a CEO and co-founder. At the same time, he was also defrauding the platform's customers. Investors and customers? Fried raised more than $1.8 billion from investors, including U.S. investors who bought an equity stake in FTX, believing that FTX had appropriate controls and risk management measures. Big mistake. Unbeknownst to those investors and to FTX trading customers, SBF was orchestrating a massive, years-long fraud, diverting billions of dollars of the trading platform's customer funds for his own personal benefit and to help him grow his crypto empire. Now, throughout this period, Bankman-Fried portrayed himself as a responsible leader of the crypto community. Everybody was saying, this guy's incredible, and he's a hero, and this is rich altruism or something. Scrolling down here to see who drafted this. Looks like the gentleman's name is Jorge. So shout out to Jorge, David, and Layden, who are all from the SEC out of New York. So scrolling back up, the summary continues for us, giving us some details. SBF touted the importance of regulation and accountability. He told the public, including investors, that FTX was both innovative and responsible, and that customers around the world believed his lies and sent billions of dollars to FTX believing their assets were secure. But from the very start, SBF improperly diverted customer assets to his private hedge fund, Alameda Research. And then they used those customer funds to make undisclosed venture investments, lavish real estate purchases in the Bahamas, and to make large political donations, mostly to Democrats. SBF hid all of this from FTX's equity investors, including U.S. investors, from whom he sought to raise billions of dollars in additional funds. He repeatedly cast FTX as innovative and a conservative trailblazer in the crypto markets, and everybody was lavishing it up. He told investors and prospective investors that FTX had top-notch, sophisticated, automated risk measures in place to protect customer assets, and that those assets were safe and secure, and that Alameda was just another platform with no special privileges. Now, those statements were false, obviously, and they were misleading. In truth, SBF had exempted Alameda from any of the risk mitigation measures and had provided Alameda with significant special treatment on the platform, including a virtually unlimited line of credit funded by the platform's customers. Just a blank check, essentially. Now, while he spent lavishly on office space and condos in the Bahamas, and he sank billions of dollars of customer funds into speculative investments, SBF's house of cards began to crumble. When prices of crypto plummeted in May 2022, Alameda's lenders demanded repayment on billions of dollars of loans. Despite the fact that Alameda had, by this point, already taken billions of dollars of FTX customer assets, it was unable to satisfy those loans. SBF then directed FTX to divert billions more in customer assets to Alameda to ensure that they maintained their lending relationships and that money would continue to flow from its lenders to other investors. But Fried did not stop there. Even as it was increasingly clear that Alameda and FTX could not make customers whole, SBF continued to misappropriate the funds. Through the summer of 2022, he directed hundreds of millions more in FTX customer funds to Alameda, which he then used for additional venture investments and for loans to himself and to other FTX executives. All the while, Sam continued to make misleading statements to investors and about FTX's financial condition and their risk management. Even in 2022 November, faced with billions of dollars in customer withdrawal demands that FTX could not fulfill, SBF still misled investors from whom he needed the money to plug a multi-billion-dollar hole. Holy moly. His brazen multi-year scheme finally came to an end when FTX, Alameda, and their tangled web of affiliated entities filed for bankruptcy on November 11th. So here you can see the violations are several. They say that he violated the Securities Act 1933, also the Securities Exchange Act 1934, and several other different rules. And they say that, dear judge, unless SBF is permanently restrained and enjoined, he will continue to engage in this type of fraud and corruption. So they're seeking relief. They want the court to do a couple things. One, permanently stop SBF from doing this stuff. No more business of this at all. They also want to disgorge any of his ill-gotten gains and pay interest on all the money he took. They want civil penalties and damages. They want an officer and director bar pursuant to Section 20, right? So he can't appear on any boards or work in any of this space at all. You're banned from crypto. Prohibit defendant from participating in the offer or sale of securities, including crypto assets. All right, so a lot of people, like Kevin O'Leary, are saying, well, it's just a little bit of a slip up. Founders fail, and so what? And we give them the benefit of the doubt. This is America, right? Everybody can declare bankruptcy, and everybody can start over again. All right. I love that idea. However, this guy took $40 billion or something and robbed his customers for multiple years. So not so sure that's the same thing as you gave it a good shot and you failed. This is a little bit different. But the point is, what the SEC is saying, no, never again. You're never doing this stuff again, ever. Also, ordering other further relief that the court deems appropriate. They say that the court has jurisdiction. Yeah, we're in the right location, Judge. You should be hearing this case. They tell us who the defendants are. We, of course, know who Bankman-Fried is. He's 30 years old, co-founder, majority owner of FTX. Prior to stepping down, he was its CEO. He resided in Hong Kong and the Bahamas. The entities we're familiar with, FTX, Antigua and Barbuda Limited Corporation, began operations May 2019. Available most countries, but not permitted to provide services in certain countries, right? There were sort of national limitations on this. We also had Alameda Research. That was the hedge fund, the crypto hedge fund. This was founded in October 2017. Prior to the bankruptcy filing, Bankman and Wang had been their sole equity owners. Fried owned 90%. Wow. Bankman was the CEO of Alameda until he appointed Caroline Ellison, who we talked at the start of the segment, which was his girlfriend. And his girlfriend, as we saw earlier, was evidently in New York, presumably working with the Southern District to get him indicted via the grand jury. Sam Trabucco became CEOs. Alameda filed for Chapter 11 right around the same time. Ellison was the sole CEO. She got appointed August 2022. Yikes. So they probably knew this was all crashing down. And he's like, hey, baby. Hey, baby, what's up? Hey, baby, what are you doing? You want to be the CEO of Alameda? SBF. She's like, yeah, I'd love that. I'm a CEO. I've always thought I was a CEO. He's like, yeah, you'll be great at this. Why don't you go take up Alameda? Yikes. Wonder how that relationship's going. So the facts are as followed. They say that Bankman-Fried created a complex web of entities with FTX and Alameda at its center. In October 2017, Fried and Wang founded Alameda, a quantitative trading firm specializing in crypto assets. Yeah. At its inception, Alameda was focused on arbitrage and trading strategies, but it went on to employ other strategies like market making, yield farming, volatility trading, and other things. Alameda also offered over-the-counter services and other debt and equity investments. Now, at first, SBF was responsible for trading operations, and Wang handled the engineering and the programming. But over time, Alameda hired additional employees, including Singh and Ellison and Trabucco. But by the end of 2021, Alameda had 30 employees, and they shared office space with FTX. Now, Fried remained the ultimate decision maker even after the others became CEO. He directed investment, operational decisions. He frequently communicated with the employees, had full access to their records, and so on. In or around 2018, Fried began working on a crypto asset trading platform that turned into FTX, which began operations in March. They offered customers a ton of services: spot market trading, spot margin trading, off-platform, over-the-counter portal access. Yeah, it was a very nice platform. It looked like it was doing a bunch of cool stuff. Evidently, it wasn't doing much. In fact, even the Bitcoin you may have bought may not have actually been purchased. SBF was the ultimate decision maker at FTX until the day he resigned. Now, January 2020, they founded FTX US, which was in the United States. Over time, Bankman expanded his holdings, including to a number of other companies. The interconnected web grew to over 100 separate entities, with Bankman at the top and his crypto hedge fund at the center. And this, I think, is an important point because they're following the bouncing ball of money from SBF and Alameda and FTX. That's it, right? When you see these numbers like 59 million bucks, they go to the federal elections website and they say, all right, how much money did SBF himself specifically donate? But how much of this was funneled to over 100 separate entities? And how much of that money went from those separate entities then to these politicians? So if you talked about the entire ecosystem, what would that encompass? All the PACs, all the soft money, all the hard money, where's it all going? FTX is as a subsidiary. All right, so some details there. Now this continues. Through the relevant period in multiple statements, SBF put himself out as a visionary. He conducted intensive public relations campaigns and branded himself as an honest steward of crypto. Reality was different, though. From the start, contrary to what the investors and others were told, SBF continually diverted customer funds and used those to grow his empire, used billions of dollars to make undisclosed private venture investments, political contributions, and real estate purchases. At the time, throughout the relevant period, he also solicited equity investors, raised 1.8 billion bucks from a lot of people. They're probably unhappy about this. Approximately 8 million came from the sale of shares of Series A stock. 1 billion came from the sale of FTX Series B stock, and 420 million from the sale of B1 stock. 500 million from another Series C. In total, 90 investors, 1.1 billion bucks. Woo! It's a lot. Now, do the math on that. It's a lot of money per investor. They're very unhappy about this. So for the entire span of the relevant period, while raising money from equity investors, Sam and those speaking on his behalf said that FTX was safe. It was very safe. It had a comparative advantage due to automated risk mitigation procedures. We've got bots and we're doing AI and we're all very sophisticated. Now, as discussed, these statements and others were misleading. FTX failed to disclose to investors all of the nefarious things that were happening between FTX and Alameda. Similarly, SBF made statements that were misleading because he did not disclose the special treatment that his girlfriend at Alameda was getting, including the virtually unlimited line of credit at FTX, allowed it to carry a negative balance in its customer account. He also misrepresented the risk profile throughout this time, said that they were liquid. They were not. The stuff that was deposited means that they were largely illiquid FTX affiliated tokens. That's right. It's called FTT. So part of what they would do is they would take your legitimate crypto. Let's say you bought a bunch of Bitcoin, which is one of these that's probably the hardest, right, of all maybe money, arguably, and certainly the hardest of all crypto. The most decentralized, nobody can manipulate it. So if you buy a bulk of that and you transfer it into this FTT token because you believe in this guy, you consider it to be an investment, right? You've just taken something that actually has value and you've converted it into something that doesn't have value. And that's exactly what happened. Now, they were promising everybody, no, look, we've got all this FTT. It's just as good. But their books were bad. These were material omissions. SBF also made material misrepresentations about its relationship. He used Alameda to carry out the fraudulent scheme. They served a number of essential functions there at Alameda. For example, Alameda was the primary market maker on FTX. In this capacity, Alameda, at SBF's direction, created liquidity on FTX to allow the platform to function. From the inception, SBF diverted customer funds. He diverted those funds in two ways. One, by directing the customers to deposit their fiat money, okay, so your US dollars, which actually have some value, into bank accounts controlled by Alameda. So you thought that it was going into FTX, but it wasn't. It was going into Alameda. Then Alameda could draw down from a limitless line of credit also over at FTX, which was also funded by customer assets. Insane. As a result, there was no meaningful distinction between customer funds and Alameda's own funds, right? It's just one giant pot of money. It's like a kid, you know, it's like a kid on Halloween. You know, the kids on Halloween, when you put the candy bowl out and you say, just take one, and the kids come and they take the whole bowl. It's kind of what these guys were doing. No responsibility at all. Bankman thus gave Alameda carte blanche to use FTX customer assets for its own trading operations and for whatever purpose Bankman-Fried saw fit. Yeah, take whatever candy you want. It's a free-for-all. It's unlimited. Have the whole bowl. In essence, SBF placed billions of dollars of FTX customer funds into Alameda and then used Alameda as his own personal piggy bank to buy luxury condos, support political campaigns, make private investments, among other things. None of this was disclosed to equities investors or to trading customers. Nobody had any idea. From the start of their operations in May until at least 2021, customers deposited dollars into bank accounts. Billions of dollars were deposited into their piggy banks. At least some of these accounts were not in Alameda's name, but rather in the name of another organization called North Dimension Inc., a subsidiary of Alameda. Their website does not disclose any connection to Alameda. SBF directed its customers to send their funds to North Dimension in an effort to hide the fact that and those funds were being sent to Alameda accounts. All right, so he just creates another one, right? He doesn't like the name. The money's going to Alameda. That looks really bad. People are asking questions. So he creates a subsidiary called North Dimension. Money goes there instead. Same difference. Nothing happens or changes. Alameda did not segregate these funds, but instead commingled them with other assets and used them indiscriminately to fund its ventures. The multi-billion-dollar liability was reflected in an internal account that was not tied to Alameda. It was called fiat@ftx.com. Looks like an email address or something. Characterizing the amount of customer funds had the effect of concealing the liability in their systems. So it's a whole database. Yeah, they just labeled it. Amazing. In quarterly balance sheets, Alameda provided, they called this stuff loans, but they did not specify the loan was from FTX. Somebody says, can we take a look at your books, Alameda? Sure. What's the loan? Well, it's just a loan from somebody. Who's it from? It's from FTX. What's the loan? Where did FTX get the money? Oh, from the customer's funds. Oh, didn't know you were allowed to do that. Guess what? You're not. Alameda was not required to pay interest, and the liability reflected as fiat@ftx.com. Nobody asked. In 2022, FTX began trying to separate Alameda's portion of the liability from the other portion to FTX. They're trying to separate it out. They're like, oh crap, we're in big trouble. Alameda's portion, which amounted to more than $8 billion in FTX assets, was deposited. It was initially moved to a different account in the database. However, because this change caused the internal systems to automatically charge Alameda interest on the more than $8 billion liability, Bankman directed Alameda liability to be moved to another account that would not be charged interest. You're just moving money around. The account was associated with an individual that had no apparent connection to Alameda, and that was done to conceal their liability. Now, in addition to receiving cash deposits from customers, Alameda also benefited from undisclosed features on the FTX platform. So these people are just the worst. So in addition to taking your money and using it for investment purposes without you knowing anything about that, and you trusting that, your money's going to be there, it's all going to be there, it's not, FDIC insured or anything, so you're trusting that it's there. They did all of that. It was their own personal piggy bank. But they also had access to all sorts of data and some pretty amazing tools to use to leverage and further their gain. They said that it allowed FTX to divert customer assets. In addition to that, Alameda was also able to maintain a negative balance in its customer account at FTX. You can't do that. SBF directed the software code to be written and updated in May, ultimately allowed Alameda to maintain a negative balance untethered from any collateral requirements. No other customer at FTX was permitted to maintain a negative balance, obviously. On multiple occasions, SBF directed FTX to increase the amount by which Alameda could maintain that line of credit. It said, oh, we've got plenty of money. We've got limitless customer funds, so don't worry about it. The line of credit was continually raised to the point where it grew to tens of billions of dollars, and it effectively became limitless. It's like a credit card with no limit. The funds just keep coming, and you don't even really have to pay it back. No other FTX customer had a similar line of credit. In May, 2022, Bankman-Fried directed Alameda to be exempted from auto liquidation, right? Spot margin. You get overextended in trading, you get liquidated. Bye, money's gone, it's ours now. Shouldn't have made that trade. But not for Alameda. They don't get automatically liquidated. As a result, their collateral could fall below the requisite margin levels without triggering automatic liquidation of its account. Only customer exempted on FTX. Very convenient. Now, all of these privileges were afforded to Alameda and only Alameda. At SBF's direction, all of it was hidden from investors. These privileges permitted Alameda to draw on FTX customer assets at virtually unlimited extents for its own uses. And because the trading account was able to maintain a negative balance backed by unbacked by sufficient collateral, they diverted billions of dollars in customer assets. Starting around 2021, SBF directed Alameda borrow billions of dollars more from third-party crypto asset companies. And after they borrowed all that money, he used it for his personal gain. In May 2022, crypto prices were dropping precipitously. Several of these lenders demanded repayment from Alameda. We gave you these big loans, but your value has dropped considerably. We'd like our money back now. Because Alameda did not have sufficient assets to cover all of these obligations, SBF directed Alameda to draw on, quote, its line of credit from FTX, which they didn't really have. Billions of dollars of the FTX customer funds were thus diverted to Alameda and used by Alameda to repay those loans. And because Alameda now had billions of dollars more in liability to FTX, on top of the billions of dollars reflected in the fiat account, SBF, concerned that this enormous liability would alarm Alameda's lenders, directed Alameda to hide this line of credit in Alameda's balance sheet. I mean, how is that not intentional right here? Where are all of the defenders of SBF on that little fact? Now, of course, everybody is innocent until proven guilty. But boy, that does not sound good. This guy is having software code literally written to conceal his bad actions. Now, despite the fact that Alameda now owed FTX billions of dollars with no prospect or raising capital to pay off its, quote, line of credit, SBF continued to direct Alameda to draw on the line of credit over the summer of 2022. The customer funds diverted were used, among other things, to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in loans back over to Bankman and to other FTX executives, as well as hundreds of millions more to fund additional venture investments. Throughout the relevant period, SBF was directly involved in soliciting investors. He communicated with many people. He was the point person for investor relations at FTX. People thought he was just this weird crypto guru. FTX's terms of service were publicly available on the website. Here's what they said on the website. You control the digital assets held in your account. Title to your assets belong to you and don't go to FTX. Wrong. They took it all anyways. None of the assets in your account are the property of FTX Trading. Well, they took it. Similarly, FTX posted on its website key principles for investors. And they told investors in their writings that they segregate customer assets. Didn't do that. In addition, they made that document available on its website. They communicated with a U.S. investor who dropped $35 million into FTX's Series B fundraising round. Yikes. 35 million dono. That's a pretty big super chat, for SBF here. I believe in you. Here's a nice super chat for 35 million. And then of course everything goes away. Yeah. As described above, these statements to publics and others, FTX did not segregate its customer assets from its own assets, as events would later demonstrate, did not maintain liquidity to allow customer withdrawals on demand. FTX investors were provided with their audited financial statements, right, which were all fraudulent, fairly presented in materials. These audited were at least materially misleading. And throughout the relevant period, they say that Sam made public statements assuring that the customer's assets were safe. He published something back in June. He said, we're safe. We're backstopping customer assets should always be primary. Everything else is secondary, right? Meaning that your customer funds are safe and secure. We have everything backstopped. They're all backed up by real money. In other words, if you want to withdraw your money, you can, because it's got liquidity. It's backed up. It's backed by something, not fake FTT coins. He likewise tweeted on August 9th, he says, as always, everybody, our users' funds and safety comes first. We will always allow withdrawals, except in the case of money laundering, theft, etc. Come on. So he's lying. Now, SBF also told investors and others at FTX that Alameda received no preferential treatment from FTX. They said there are no parties that have privileged access. We're not colluding with them. They said Alameda is a wholly separate entity. We're at arm's length and we don't get any different information to them than anybody else. SBF knew or recklessly disregarded those statements. He knew he was directly involved in establishing this preferential treatment. And he's the person who made that claim. The article was published September 22nd. In the article published by Bloomberg, he said, Alameda is wholly separate. We're at arm's length and we don't get any different treatment from other market makers. Lied as recently as September. From its inception, FTX had poor controls, deficient risk management procedures, executives were idiots. The reality was in sharp contrast to the image that Bankman portrayed to America and to the rest of the world. Looked like a mature company, managed funds, and had a conservative risk algorithms. They promoted their brand as trustworthy. One investor got materials around June 2022. He gets this nice brochure. Would you also like to drop $35 million investing on me? They say FTX has an industry-leading brand endorsed by some of the most trustworthy people like Tom Brady, MLB, Gisele Bündchen, Steve Curry, Miami Heat, backed by many. FTX has the cleanest brand in crypto. Now, they promoted itself as a company willing to work with regulators. They say we're also the only major digital asset venue to maintain positive relationships with regulators. They created this fake automated risk engine, right? They said that we're smart computer programmers. We're like these gurus. And SBF actually went to the United States House of Representatives, December 8th, 2021. Here's what he said. This was after he was blowing kissy faces with Maxine Waters. Says, and the last thing I will say is this. If you look at what precipitated some of the 2008 financial crisis, this is SBF talking here, says, you will see a number of bilateral, bespoke, non-reported transactions happening between financial counterparties, and then got repackaged and releveraged again and again, such that no one knew how much risk was in the system until it fell apart. If you compare that, he said, to what's happening at FTX or other major cryptocurrencies, there is complete transparency about the full open interest. There is complete transparency about the positions. There is robust, consistent risk framework applied. So just lied directly to Congress. Now, in addition to promoting those benefits, he repeatedly claimed that FTX's own risk engine was very sophisticated, carefully calibrated. He said the same thing to the CFTC. They said that our calculations come up with customer margin every 30 seconds, and if collateral falls, well, then we make adjustments. But those statements were material false and misleading. He did not confirm that this risk engine was basically a joke. Now you can see the rest of this here is about the valuation of Alameda's collateral. They manipulated these assets. They made a difference between current price and fair price. They had a whole bunch of illiquid tokens that just weren't actually anything of value. They made loans. They made real estate purchases. Bankman commingled funds to make large political donations and purchased tens of millions of dollars in real estate, also for himself, for his parents, and other FTX executives. Singh and Wang, they borrowed $554 million and $224 million respectively. These are two other co-entities who helped formulate and found FTX and Alameda, or they were early employees there. $554 million is borrowed by Singh and $224 million borrowed by Wang. Promissory notes with Alameda in 2021 and 2022. And holy moly, my friends, we got a whopper of a super chat that just came in from Marion Holtzman. I think that's a record breaker on the show. I didn't even know that you could do that amount. He says, I believe that they arrested him to stop him from testifying. Right. SBF was scheduled to testify today. He said that he was going to do it today. And then I think he was backing out. He said that he was overbooked about this. Marion Holtzman says, like Hillary, it's a I go down, you go down scenario. Nothing will come of this as usual. That Southern District of New York is involved is all we need to know. That very astute observation there, Marion Holtzman. Yeah, SDNY, as you know, it's the same organization that prosecuted Ghislaine Maxwell and didn't prosecute anybody else other than Ghislaine. The Ghislaine Maxwell who was one person who was certainly involved in it, but weren't there a whole bunch of other individuals as well that never saw any repercussions from this? SDNY. And, we'll come back to that, Marion. When we're done with this, we'll pull up there was an article that I saw that SBF said that he was overbooked. So I don't know what happened, but you're very right to be skeptical about it. It all seems very, very interestingly timed. And thank you, Marion, for the very generous donation. Holy moly. That's the super chat. Man, that's a big one. Thank you for that. 69 is as follows as we continue. It says the loans to Bankman and other individuals were so poorly documented, at times not documented at all. And similarly, the record keeping regarding the purchase and the ownership of real estate was poorly organized and documented. So that money, I don't know why you need $500 million. Can I just borrow $500 million? Sure. Yeah. What do you need it for? Property? Oh, that makes sense. Go get it. Neither the fact of the loans or the purchases, nor the documentation of significant company liabilities and expenditures was disclosed to investors. Now, despite the precarious financial position, Bankman continued to use customer assets. We're getting closer in time now to the current era. And it says in May 2022, crypto markets plummeted. There was a significant loss in value across the entire industry. Bankman characterized FTX and himself as playing an important role in stabilizing the industry. He entered into a series of transactions with other members of the industry, providing credit to and taking over other failing firms. On June 21st, 2022, after giving a $250 million line of credit to BlockFi, a global crypto financial services company, to provide the company with access to capital, Bankman-Fried tweeted, "We take our duty seriously to protect the digital asset ecosystem and its customers." At the same time, he was positioning himself as a hero. However, the plummeting value of the crypto assets was impacting Alameda and the resulting FTX. As a result, the same market conditions that nuked BlockFi also were coming after Alameda. They demanded repayment of the loan. SBF directed Alameda to draw down billions of dollars from its fake line of credit, taking money from its customers to fund the loans. Thus, in the summer of 2022, Bankman-Fried knew, or was reckless to not know, that FTX was in a very precarious position. He continued to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase other crypto companies and allowed Alameda to use FTX funds to repay its debts. SBF also and other FTX executives continued to draw customer funds in the form of poorly documented, undisclosed loans. Another undisclosed loan was on July 22nd. SBF loaned himself a cool $136 million. I could use it. I kind of deserve it, he said. When he made this loan, he knew, or he was reckless in not knowing, of the significant financial risk it imposed to Alameda and FTX. It actually imperiled their financial condition. So you don't know what he's trying to do, right? Is he taking a big chunk of money and going to the slot machines? Is he trying to put $136 million on a horse somewhere and win, 10-1 odds on that and come back and paper over Alameda? I don't know. But it seems to me like maybe he knows the ship is sinking and he's trying to stuff some away under the mattress in hopes that the feds don't find it. Now, despite FTX's tenuous financial condition, SBF continued to present a false and misleading positive account to the world. In a meeting, September 2022, he told U.S. investors, he said, outside of BlockFi, we didn't increase our exposure to crypto. Lie. That statement was false and misleading. The customer funds that they diverted included customer funds and other issues. They know that Sam was reckless in not knowing this. They say his own FTT token was cratering and it wasn't backed by anything. In the same meeting, FTX also represented that certain investments did not involve the assets of its customers. They represented, contrary, that two $100 million were through a different vehicle. But that wasn't true. It was all customer funds. As the scheme was spiraling out of control, SBF continued to mislead investors. November 2nd comes. CoinDesk, a crypto news website, published an article stating that based on its review of an Alameda balance sheet, Alameda had a pretty big position in FTT, that fake currency. It's a worthless currency. On November 6th, the CEO of Binance, a crypto asset trading platform, announced that due to recent revelations that we're liquidating our FTT holdings, right? That's the fake currency. If everybody drops it, then it's other people drop it, right? And it loses its value rapidly. Binance at the time held more than $500 million in that token. It got that as part of a buyout deal earlier. Binance announced that, and it caused many FTX customers to withdraw, right? They're going, oh, darn it. If Binance is withdrawing this, there must be a pretty big reason, so I better drop my FTT too. Everybody starts selling it. Bankman-Fried knew that he was reckless or was reckless in not knowing that any further drop of FTT threatened the solvency of the entire company. To prevent the collapse of the market of FTT, Ellison tweeted an offer to buy Binance's entire stake for $22 per token. He says, hey, CZ, if you're looking to minimize the market impact on your FTT sales, Alameda will happily buy it all from you today at $22. Okay, so she's taking your customer money and just going and buying that back. So it's this big loop. Attempting to maintain public and investor confidence, Fried tweeted on November 7th. He said, FTX is fine. Assets are fine. FTX has enough to cover all client holdings. We don't invest client assets, even in treasuries. We've been processing all withdrawals and will continue to be so. Obviously, that was false. The tweet was false and misleading. Fried later deleted it. He knew that FTX, at his direction, allowed Alameda to use client assets, and he had done so. The next day, FTX paused all customer withdrawals. The price of FTT plummeted by 80%. The collateral on deposit was worth far less than what they borrowed, and FTX was left with billions in unrecoverable loans. Facing a solvency crisis, on November 8th, CEO tweeted, FTX asked for help. There is significant liquidity crunch. To protect our users, we signed a non-binding letter of intent intending to fully acquire FTX from Binance. It took one day, however, for Binance to say, yikes, no thanks. As a result of our corporate due diligence, as well as latest reports, FTX is a total disaster, so we're not buying that company at all. FTX customers then withdrew $5 billion from the platform that day. SBF sought emergency funding from other investors, including from U.S. investors, to cover the shortfall of $8 billion. As part of this effort, he circulated a balance sheet to potential investors that listed a negative $8 billion entry as hidden, poorly internally labeled fiat account, he says. This entry was in reference to the above described account. During a meeting with employees November 9th, Ellison admitted that she, Fried, Wang, and Singh were aware that customer funds had been used by Alameda. And on the morning of November 10th, confronting the implosion, SBF tweeted, I'm sorry. That's the biggest thing. No, not really. Not really the biggest thing, actually. No, that's nice that you're sorry, but no, it's not the biggest thing. He says, I'm sorry. That's the biggest thing. I effed up and I should have done better. In the same tweet thread, SBF announced that Alameda was winding down trading and would soon not trade on FTX at all. Said that they maintain client deposits. SBF maintained that FTX International currently has a total market value of assets higher than client deposits, right? He's saying we can still fund all of your withdrawals. And he stated, among other things, that he was trying to raise liquidity. The next day, he resigned. So that didn't last long. Shortly thereafter, 100 affiliated entities filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now you can see the first claim for relief, fraud, securities fraud. They're saying that all of this was fraudulent. They're demanding relief. Same thing here. Fraud in connection with securities. For relief, they want him permanently enjoined from, working in this industry. They want to order him to pay back all of the money, disgorged from all of the funds, plus prejudgment interest on any ill-gotten gains. ordering him to pay civil monetary penalties, barred from acting as an officer or director on any organizations, cannot participate in any crypto asset securities, banned from the whole industry basically, and anything else that the judge deems appropriate. They want a jury trial signed by Jorge G. Tenrero, representing the Security and Exchange Commission out of New York. And so that one's a little bit juicier, right? That's where we get some more details. Now, a lot of this material, right, this is sort of a civil complaint brought by the SEC, but this is what I expect to see show up in a lot of the criminal complaint, which was a little less meaty. That's the one that we went through previously, the actual sealed indictment. And so, as I mentioned, there were actually 3 different complaints that were filed. We read through the first one from the Southern District of New York. We just looked at the Security Exchange Commission. Let's take a quick gander at this Commodities Futures Trading Commission because it's also a big one. You can see here, this is another 40 pages, a complaint for injunctive and other equitable relief and for damages against Sam Bankman-Fried. And this one is listing a couple other entities, including FTX Trading and Alameda Research. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing because a lot of it mirrors the prior document that we just read, but you can see, right, this is a whole additional U.S. government entity called the Commodity Futures Trading Commission that's making a similar complaint. They say he was in charge of FTX, all sorts of celebrity endorsements. He collapsed his empire, lost $8 billion of customer deposits, market making, all working together with Alameda, relevant period. They said that everything was safeguarded. It was not. Jurisdiction, we all know who the venues are that are appropriate. They tell us that the plaintiff here, in this case, which is a little bit different, is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. It's the independent federal regulatory agency that is charged by Congress with the enforcement of the Commodity Exchange Act. SBF, we know who he is. We also know who the other defendants are. Now, the purpose of this entity is to serve interests through a system of self-regulation, oversight, deter manipulation, protect market integrity, financial integrity of all transactions, and so on. All right, and they're also regulating some digital assets. And they have a whole slew of law that they think is relevant. And they give us a little bit more detail here. They wrote a white paper. They're trading $600 million to $1 billion a day and so on. If we scroll all the way down and fast forward through this document, which you can certainly read on your own, they'll talk about the different market events that are happening, how prices relate to different market events, and how his statements are manipulating the markets. And what that did to the markets, right? So they're sort of analyzing it all. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom and see what they're actually asking for, they're demanding a jury trial, but they're also asking for the following relief. An order that they do the following: a permanent injunction, no further involvement with any of these entities, no trading, no transactions, no solicitation, nothing. An order saying that they're disgorged of profits. And a lot of this mirrors the prior stuff that we've talked about. So another government entity signed off this one by Jack Murphy out of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, December 13th. And that's SBF. He's facing 3 separate complaints, and these are going to be things that he has to deal with for the foreseeable future. The big one that I'm interested in, I want to see what more of the discovery looks like, what the facts look like in the criminal charges case, which is coming out of the Southern District of New York. Of course, we will continue to cover this one of the biggest frauds in American history. And one thought as we were reading through this today, did anybody else notice that you could sort of interchange FTX, just swap out FTX and just insert Twitter. Just insert Twitter in there. Rather than cryptocurrencies, we're talking about free speech, right? Rather than one product being a security or a crypto coin, the other product that Twitter was using was free speech. There were all sorts of similar lies told to Congress, to regulators, to our representatives, to us, to investors, to board members. They told us that Twitter was honest and truthful and they weren't censoring or suppressing anybody. They did. They did all of that. SBF said, no, we do things, we keep your funds safe, just like we keep your speech safe. Nope, they didn't do any of that, right? And so we see these just catastrophic frauds that sort of exist in all of the different pillars of infrastructure throughout this country. And we see some action here, right? This one's a little bit more concrete. I think people can digest the fact that they had, $100 in a bank account and now it's gone. They can feel that. This free speech assault by another mega corporation, also that was led and housed by a bunch of tech bro gurus, evidently. They did the same thing. They defrauded an entire nation, arguably the entire world. And we'll see if there are any consequences for them. But I'll save that tangent for a different video. Thank you, my friends, for joining us as we covered this one. We will continue to do so. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking this video wherever it is you're watching it. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.